Profile Profile share via email report story. His taps hit the wooden deck in such an unnecessary, loud manner. He can tap his foot all he wants, but she won't give in to the annoying noises he's making. He wants her attention so bad that he has the nerve to provoke her with the hard thump of his foot. She couldn't even try to ignore because noises like that distracted the hell out of her. And that man knows that very well. She closed her eyes, taking in deep breaths. Can't the guy leave her alone? What does he think she came out here for? To hear his stupid tapping. She wants some time to herself, he can see that. To smell the ocean breeze and calmly look out up above. Just by herself with no one around. She only wants peace. But maybe this is him getting back at her for all the times she woke him up from his naps to fetch her things that she is very capable of doing herself. She technically destroyed his peace multiple times. That's probably the reason why, isn't it? Turn around, woman. He stopped the creaking noise when speaking to show her that he was serious and is not trying to upset her anymore. Let me talk to you. The fact that such a guy wanted to start a conversation amused her. Someone who rather would sleep than listen to a backstory of yours, someone who is really only interested in swords and nothing else, wanted to talk. And she knew it's not a talk about swords, too. How can she not turn around now? She was too curious. Make it quick. A response like that was a sign of approval to the swordsman. So what the hell happened back there? Nami shook her head. It's true that he genuinely wanted to talk, but please, for the love of Kami, she did not want to talk about that right now. Zoro, please, not now. She let out a huge groan, letting him know that yes, she was avoiding that topic. Fine. He walked over to her, leaning on the deck's rail facing the kitchen's door instead of the ocean. But you actually acted like a woman for once. He couldn't help but smirk at her expression from earlier in the dining room. You know, your face being red and all. Nami blushed furiously at his words. I always act like a woman, excuse you, 99% of the time you're just a bossy bitch. Not very feminine-like to me. He still held his smirk, gazing over at her flushed face. She didn't act like the confident woman like always, but instead was as shy as Chopper. It's a rare sight to see the navigator so hot because it's hard to get her so flustered. But something from the kitchen's window caught his eye. When focusing his gaze to that direction, Brooke was there watching the two of them with soulless eyes. Sheesh, he had none first of all, and when the musician took notice of Zoro staring back at him, he winked. The swordsman thought it was a wink. The guy had no eyelids or eyes to properly show it. What was the wink for anyways? A figure then appeared behind the tall skeleton, peeking through the circular window, who looked rather curious as to what Brooke kept focusing on. As Luffy realized what caught Brooke's attention, he held a blank face instead of a smile. Not being used to receiving Luffy's death glare, Zoro broke eye contact with his captain and awkwardly tried to move out of the kitchen door's view. He couldn't normally speak if two crewmates of his would be staring the whole time. Hey, where do you think you're going? Zoro walked away from her for an unknown reason, and she didn't seem to realize the two were being watched that moment. The swordsman was a good distance away from the kitchen now and was okay with saying something back to her. First you wanted to be left alone because you ignored me in the beginning. Now you don't want me to leave you by yourself. Suddenly scared of the dark now. He teased. Luckily, Nami decided to walk to where he was now, leaving Brooke and Luffy to stare at nothing. She rolled her eyes, going to his direction. It was weird to talk to a friend who's over 10 feet away from you. By the way, is that all you wanted to talk about? She ignored his comment about her being a scaredy cat. About why I became red when looking at you. His nod told her she was right. Then forget about it, you won't get an answer out of me. Promoted stories. You'll also like My One Piece Book 1 11.6K 278. Monkey D. Luffy. A cheerful, carefree young man from East Blue wearing a straw hat set sail on a small boat carrying the biggest dream of finding the One Piece. He's our ultimate devil fruit, One Piece fanfic. 197K 6.1K. Clarity lived a fairly normal life, at least she did until she was thrown into the world of devil fruits and pirates. Stuck in the grasps of her own hell for over 10 years. My selfish captain, Luffy x Nami. 151K 2.4K. The long-awaited 2-year reunion leaves Nami with unknown feelings, and could this be the case for Luffy as well? One Piece does not belong to me. It belongs to Oda-sen. A Pirate's Life for me 33,713. Follow along through the adventure of the Straw Hat Pirates and their new and unsuspected crew member. This is a One Piece fanfic that attempts to follow closely to Sea Stone, Luffy X Reader. 82.7K 2.5K. Just a Luffy X Fem. Reader. Takes place at Impel Down and will be using stuff from the actual show, so if you're not past episode 400 you might not want to read. I won't D. I need you more. 23.5K 320. In the wake of their new victory in Wano, time spilled into the hands of Luffy and Nami. Recognition of their silent feelings wailed in their hearts like aches, kraken. Dream Op X Reader. 50.3K 2.5K. When one looks back to their childhood, one remembers the vivid springs of laughter, climbing trees and reaching out for the stars, and making flower crowns in fields of. Doesn't matter since I kinda have a hint. Her confused gaze that told him she wanted to know what he thinks he knows, made him continue on. Connecting your tomato cheeks to the stuff you were blabbing gave me a clue on why you look like that. But I'm probably wrong anyways. It's a bit of a stretch. No matter what his theory was, Nami stared at him with worried eyes, scared that he does know her reason. But he let his train of thought ride past his mind before he would say a word. Looking at the way the Mikan lover glanced at the moss head, one would think she likes him. Zoro knew very well that was far from the truth. In no universe would Nami like him or he and her be an item ever. Based on Usopp and Nami's conversation, the topic was about if the navigator had any slight interest in her crewmates. He tried replaying the important scenes in his head. She became hesitant in denying and mostly gave up at that point. As much as the napper hated to admit, he knew this greed monster's thinking based on his observations. He could even tell that Usopp wasn't leaving without an answer from the weather freak, and she decided in order for him to leave her alone, she'll give him a false presentation of what he wanted. He tried to figure out a situation where Nami had to look at Zoro, himself, and it only came down to one. The situation was this. Usopp thought he would know who Nami liked if she glanced at him as she denied. Like he thought from the start, she did not want to be with a guy like him, and it was the same for Zoro. This means the navigator decided to look at Zoro to misdirect her true feelings for another crew member. It's a stretch, indeed, and the swordsman truly thought it might not be it and chose to not mention it. He sighed though, all that hard thinking to only not be told. Oh well, Nami frowned at his figure, not moving a muscle. He stood there silently. Can you just say it already? I don't have all night, idiot. I wanna go to bed, too. The train in his brain suddenly disappeared, making him go back to reality and not be lost in his thoughts anymore. He blinked a bit, staring at the orange head's impatient expression. Then go to bed. He passed by her, wanting to go back into the kitchen to escape from her punches. He wasted her time by standing there for 5 minutes saying nothing, of course she'd be mad. Plus, she wouldn't want to go back inside the kitchen anyways. He didn't conclude an actual reason, but based on how she hesitated to follow him again, proved him right. Have fun sleeping, which? Nami was left defeated. She didn't want to go to the kitchen, and that was clearly where he was heading. All she could retort back was one word, being asshole, and because there was nothing else for her to do, her feet led the way to the women's quarters. Originally where she would go after she got sick of staring at the waves. Not until Zoro had to interrupt what she considered her peaceful time to herself. Blank, underscore, blank. Yo ho ho ho. Love is in the air. Don't you agree, Luffy? Brooke asked, after watching the two walk away from kitchen door sight. He didn't show it, but the musician was a bit surprised to see the captain also stalking Zoro and Nami from behind him. A grin crept up his face when seeing a glimpse of the rubber man's upset expression, while watching his crewmates walk farther away. Luffy shifted his gaze over to the skeleton and laughed at words he deemed to be false. Between Nami and Zoro, haha, I guess, I must disagree with you. Those two fight and quarrel most of the time, it must be their way of hiding their feelings for each other, don't you think? Brooke wanted more of a reaction than that fake one. The concept is common. The kitchen was no longer as lively as before. The crew tried to figure out if Brooke was being serious or not. Brooke's quietness told them no joke was made. Frankie was the one to speak first. Just as Usopp and him feared. Someone blabbing about Zoro and Nami being a thing, unknowingly in front of the guy supposedly dating her. Sure, they already knew the navigator possibly does like the swordsman, but they rather tell the captain that in a less heartless way. Hearing that she goes well with someone that's not Luffy himself can be painful. The coward and shipwright really don't entirely know whether Luffy really does like her, but they assume the captain isn't stupid and knows that you date someone you really, really like. Oi, Brooke, you playing matchmaker or something? Don't be shipping people all of a sudden. The musician chuckled softly. Yo-ho, why so upset? He glanced over at Robin, who merely smiled at the outburst he had caused. Robin-san, what do you think? The archaeologist smiled some more. The thought of Zoro and Nami being together isn't impossible. That's not a no. Yes, it's not. Frankie's jaw dropped. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Luffy sitting down on one of the seats with his elbow propped on the table, using his palm to rest his chin on. His gaze was locked towards Robin's direction. The shipwright, too, glanced over to her, wondering what she was up to, until he shifted his gaze to the captain when hearing his voice. Nami doesn't like Zoro. The way a person says something is significant. Words spoken can be heard differently depending on the voice's tone. The crew knows two tones Luffy goes by. A playful one and a serious. The long nose bit his nails in fear when seeing their captain gape slightly at Robin's response. But the shipwright then made a horrified face when the thought of Luffy telling his crew, right there and then, that he and Nami are dating crossed his mind. Blue Hair quickly got to his feet and raced over to Luffy's side to cover his mouth before he can retort anything. Whoa there, Straw Hat, haha. His sweat dropped seeing all his other crewmates look confusingly at his action. You were about to yell at her, right? That's not cool, ha 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 ha. He couldn't have made a better, fake laugh. Luffy's muffled screaming can faintly be heard behind the cyborg's huge hand. Of course he'd be upset at what Frankie said. The rubber man wasn't going to yell at Robin or anything for disagreeing with him. But Frankie had to lie about why he covered his mouth in the first place. He couldn't actually say the truth. The shipwright eyed his captain with an apologetic gaze and Luffy looked back at him. Sorry, Straw Hat. Luffy's furrowed eyebrows disappeared and nodded his head, showing he understood. He chose to let Frankie's lie slide. Blue Hair didn't think it would affect anyone except for Luffy, but why had he forgotten about the cook of the ship? Luffy, were you about to get mad at my sweet Robin Kwan? Sanji pushed the cyborg aside, not caring he referred to the archaeologist that way in front of her significant other. I'll give you a good kick to remind you to never think of raising your voice to a lady. Frankie had already let go of his hand and Luffy finally could speak freely. By then, the rubber man was running around the table in circles trying to tire his cook. But Sanji wasn't going to play his game and decided to cut to the chase by tricking his food-loving captain into thinking he'll be getting everyone's dinner tomorrow if he stayed still. He immediately obeyed but regretted it as he saw a flying Sanji about to give him a kick to the face. Luffy, thinking rationally, took a small step to his left, moving away from the kitchen's door. The door creaked open and in came the swordsman, unaware of the loving present he'd received that second. Instead of the rubber man being kicked, the cook's foot met Zoro's face. The two rivals were out of the kitchen and they landed on the deck's floor with pissed-off looks. You stupid Marimo, you some masochist or something. Do you like getting kicked in the face? The green-haired male scowled. Shut the hell up, you dumbass. He looked behind the blonde to see Luffy give a sigh of relief. It didn't take him long to understand the situation. Was Luffy your target? No wonder your bounty is low, you have no aim at all. Usopp groaned, seeing that Zoro worsened it even more and a good 5 minutes of spatting at each other was created. Ah shit, here we go again. Chopper and Brook nodded their heads. How did we even get here? The small doctor questioned, looking at Luffy laughing away now. His mood changes quickly. The sharpshooter pointed at the tall skeleton. He started it. The musician picked up his violin and played a sad tune. He ignored Usopp. Oh, how heartbreaking. How painful. Our poor captain. His eyes were closed, wearing a frown while playing his classical instrument. Huh, came out of the long nose's mouth. What are you talking about? Brook then picked up Chopper and placed him on his bony shoulders as he repeated his sad melody. The reindeer shrugged at the known liar. Straw Hat's jealousy. Don't you see? He rather have Nami like him instead. Though it seemed like he was yelling all this, it wasn't the case for he was just quietly speaking to his two-man audience. That broke a sweat. Is Luffy actually jealous? There's not real good evidence to support that. But why is so much happening all in one day? Robin and Frankie are a couple. Luffy is supposedly dating Nami. Nami probably likes Zoro. Brook and Robin think Nami and Zoro would make a nice match, and then Brook saying stuff that he knows will rile up Mugiwara. What the hell? Wait a minute. What side are you even on? Are you rooting for Nami to get with Zoro or with Luffy? He noticed Robin glancing over at the three and he covered his mouth to whisper so she wouldn't read his lips. Brook also noticed her staring, but instead of acting secretive, he gave her a thumbs up and a wink. Luffy-san, of course. Reindeer hooves swung back and forth as Chopper, still sitting on Brook's shoulders, listened into their conversation. Then why did you keep talking about Zoro? A womanly figure decided to join in their talk. She left Frankie's side and went to sit by Brooke, taking Chopper off of him to put the small reindeer on her lap. She answered the doctor's question instead. Well, it was originally my plan. The skeleton gently chuckled at her. We thought we'd give Luffy a little push so he can finally admit the truth. Frankie gulped and so did Usopp. The sharpshooter stuttered a bit when asking what she meant by truth. You know exactly what I mean. Fuck. Just a couple feet away, the conversation had to come to an end when Zoro loudly cussed. The crew that remained in the kitchen peeked through the open door to see the swordsman shielding himself with all three of his swords as Sanji continuously aimed to kick his stomach. With the exception of Nami, the whole crew had set their eyes on the rivalry duo. Stupid cook, leave me alone. The curly-brow blonde sneered and his kicks grew more aggressive at the nickname he received. Out of all the people the crew chose to ship my sweet, precious Nami Swan with, why was it you? His eyes flared up into flames. Nami liking you, why can't everyone think she likes me? Sanji's anger died down to sadness suddenly. His own words made him depressed. He stopped his kicks and then fell to his knees, murmuring the navigator and stupid green-haired crewmate's name. Zoro rolled his eyes at his sudden change of emotions. So what if everyone's saying that? Not like it's true, but what if it is? The moss had already felt sleepy and really didn't want to anger the stupid blonde even more. He thought what he'd say next would make his usual rival go away, but he was way too wrong. Still doesn't matter. I wouldn't want to be with that witch. Sanji Tsked. I wouldn't expect anything better from you. Leaving Nami heartbroken just like that if she even likes a thick-headed guy like you. Realizing the perverted guy wasn't planning on using more of his energy to pick a fight with him, Zoro drew his katanas back. Urudasai. That woman doesn't like me like that. And I don't like her like that either. Behind the swordsman and cook, Mugiwara couldn't resist the urge but to smile that moment, Robin noted. It was as if Zoro's words alone proved his theory from earlier. But maybe also because his first mate wouldn't be a threat to him anymore. The archaeologist grinned. Luffy's probably thinking that. Does he not know how obviously relieved he looks? She can see the silly rubber man get himself up, fix that straw hat of his, throw his hands behind his head, all while whistling, and marching away to what she predicts to be the room her and Nami stays in. His signature, Shishi, was made clear, showing the happy mood he, now, was in thanks to the green-haired male. She took her eyes off the man that made enemies with the world government for her because of the distracting noise Usopp was making next to her. The sharpshooter bit his nails back and forth when seeing Luffy walk away after what Zoro said. He nudged the shipwright's arm. Look at him, Frankie. He's obviously mad because Nami likes someone who doesn't feel the same way as her. He's definitely going to do something. Usopp's eyes followed Luffy taking his leave until he was limited to see more of the deck for staying in the kitchen. Totally, Frankie replied, slowly getting up. He's so going to tell her that Zoro said it himself that he has no feelings for her and it will shatter Nami's heart. He began heading to the door. We should stop him. Usopp followed in pursuit. Agreed. As the two exited out of the kitchen, all that was left was Brooke, Robin, and Chopper, but the reindeer was already fast asleep. The skeleton and bookworm both shared disappointed glances with one another. What are they talking about? Brooke asked while sighing. Surely they don't actually believe Nami has a thing for Zoro, right? Robin shook her head and sighed as well. Unfortunately, I think that's the case. Both of the adults got up from their seats and decided to leave the kitchen, too. Robin carried the small doctor in her arms while passing by the duo that, even though weren't physically fighting, still had the energy to argue. As they walked across the middle of the deck, Brooke quickened his pace to stand in front of Robin to keep her still. He put his hands in front of him, his palms facing the night sky. She raised an eyebrow, not understanding his gesture. I'll be heading to the men's quarters, so I'll carry him from here. Robin opened her mouth to say something, but he interrupted. Please. He reached for the sleeping animal. I insist. She turned her body to force the musician's hands to grab onto thin air. She smiled at him. I'm quite all right, but thank you. She would make her way to the women's quarters if she could. She peeked behind the tall skeleton's shoulders to see Frankie and Usopp in the distance talking to Luffy. The captain was already very near there. It'd be awkward to pass by them and enter. She'd also interrupt what the rubber man wanted to do, if he even had an intention to go to Nami. She decided to kill some of her time at the library with the sleeping reindeer on her lap. It would be nice to end her day like such. She looked up to see Brooke be taken back by her refusal. All the other men in the ship were occupied with their business, making the skilled violinist be with only himself. She could use some company for the time being. If you had no other plans for this evening, why not join me in reading a good set of books? Brooke couldn't be any more grateful. I would love that. Blank, underscore, blank. Usopp walked alongside Frankie. Today has been eventful, but tonight will top it all off, and not in a good way. If the two lets Luffy go through that doorway, it won't be pretty. The long nose already anticipated to see Luffy's figure fly out of the room due to Nami's punch if they were too late to stop him. He decided they need a plan before confronting their captain. Okay, listen up, Frankie. He called out his name, but the cyborg ignored it. Let's, not even a whole sentence in. Frankie cut off his words to just go with the flow, no plan required. Mugiwara, stop. Okay, never mind. A sigh escaped his lips. Luffy turned around, seeing two of his crewmates wearing serious expressions. What's up? Frankie maneuvered his way to the entrance of the door that separated the women's room to the deck with his cyborg body. He blocked the door pretty well and then responded to his captain's question. Why are you going to Nami? He did his best to look menacing by crossing his arms and looking down at the shorter one of the two. The rubber man frowned, not liking the obstacle in front of him. He tried going around him, but Frankie moved so that he was still blocking him. He went around the other side and the blue hair did the same. The silly captain decided to do that over, but really quickly, hoping the shipwright would be too slow to catch up with him. But it didn't go like he thought it would, and Frankie matched up with his speed. Luffy still ran to both of his sides, trying to get past him to go to Nami, and thought he was tiring him out by doing so. That way, he'll give up chasing him and the meat lover can easily get in, but again, it didn't go the way he planned because it was himself that began to get tired. He pouted, knowing he can't ignore the question if he wanted to see his navigator. Fine, I give up. He pretended to place his bottom onto the wooden deck, and when Frankie grinned and turned over to Usopp, Luffy thought he could slip his way past this time. And it worked. Frankie didn't try blocking him because he hadn't known he'd be tricked. It still wasn't a good thing because it was instead Usopp that saw through Luffy's lie and blocked him from entry. Mugiwara gave up and slammed himself on the ship's ground. He stuck his tongue out at the both of them. Bleg. Alright, I'll tell you guys. Seriously, no games. Usopp asked. He nodded. Frankie sighed in relief, trusting him. Good. Luffy shrugged his shoulders after looking at the two who went through the trouble to stop him from entering the women's quarters for God knows what. He didn't understand. I think you guys are making a big deal out of this. I just want to see Nami before I go to sleep. The sharpshooter and shipwright glanced at each other and had winning smiles on. They finally have the chance to confirm if Luffy knows what he's doing and what is his true feelings. They had completely forgotten their original objective of stopping him. Why? A dumb question from Usopp, one would think. But every word coming from Luffy's mouth will be confirmation of their theories and questions. The captain did find it a dumb question. He did recall telling him and Chopper, I told you already, Nami and I are together. The coward was too quick to try asking another question that would verify what was just said. But Luffy already understood what would come out of his mouth. Like, Frankie and Robin, together. Isn't that what you do? Spend time with the person you're with. The captain scratched the side of his face, unsure himself. The cyborg gave a thumbs up to the long nose, knowing that answer alone was enough. It actually clarified that Luffy does think he's dating Nami, unlike Usopp's memory that wasn't strong enough evidence. The two knew themselves they couldn't go off what Usopp remembered Luffy saying, so it was good that their theory ended up being correct. But it still didn't explain if Nami was aware of Luffy's thoughts. Frankie was the one to ask first. Mugiwara, what about Nami? Does she know she's with you in that way? Luffy paused, about to say something, but closed his mouth before he said anything idiotic. Usopp nodded his head, seeing that Luffy knows she doesn't know and was about to lecture his captain on how that isn't good. But he couldn't. Well, you like her, right? Frankie interrupted Usopp. The coward loudly whispered to him on what the hell he was doing and why he can't wait until after he tells Luffy it's wrong. But the cyborg didn't bother answering. Luffy isn't some dumb teen who doesn't understand everything. He is aware of certain things. Usopp did tell the rubber man one will date a person they truly like. Luffy just can't misinterpret something so simple. So if he just answers this one question, it'll determine if. Are you stupid? Luffy's eyebrows were furrowed now. His glare that can be as dangerous as his hockey was given right at Frankie, whose scary pose dropped to a slightly frightened one. Next to him, Usopp was already away from the women's quarters door, looking away from his captain's gaze. If Usopp didn't turn around, they'd see his eyes streaming with scared tears. The long nose's absence from his side distracted the shipwright as he stared at his friend's back. Luffy took that opportunity to get past the cyborg. Though Frankie was aware of him going inside the room, he didn't stop him this time, but blankly stared at the back of his signature red vest. Blue Hair then jumped up and joined the spot Usopp was at, a place farther away from the women's quarters. It's weird to just stay behind Mugiwara while Nami opens the door. That would be awkward. Luffy. The navigator was finally seen. Frankie realized Luffy hadn't even knocked, but she still opened the door. I thought I heard something out here. What do you need? The captain used his left hand to push the door so that it gave him a larger entrance. Nami stumbled a bit as he opened the door even more without her permission. I'm coming in. The door was wide open, perfect for the rubberman to just leisurely walk in. He threw both his hands behind his head and laughed. Pardon the intrusion. Nami stood in place, too confused to stop him before he got deeper inside Robin and her room. What the hell are you doing? The tangerine lover's yelling made him frown. What's wrong? I wanted to see you. He looked back to see Usopp's back and Frankie's owl eyes. Luffy grinned, stuck his tongue out, and closed the door behind him. The only thing the cyborg was able to get before the door slammed shut was Nami's angry protests. A couple minutes passed and it seemed like she didn't choose to kick him out. Usually, he'd already be out of that room in a heartbeat. But maybe she had a change of heart. F. Frankie, did he go in? Usopp glanced up at his crewmate. Frankie waited a couple of seconds until he strutted back to the kitchen. The sharpshooter followed his lead. I'm so going to yell at him tomorrow. Did you hear that silence? He pretty much didn't deny that she has no clue what relationship Luffy thinks he has with her. But Nami might have a little bit of feelings for our captain. She hasn't kicked him out yet. From what I hear, the only ones who is ever allowed in there are the girls, and that's the rule Nami made up, so why else would she let him stay? Because she. Usopp wagged a finger. Hey, she likes Zoro. Remember, the shipwright loudly groaned and punched the air, almost forgetting what happened in the kitchen. You're right, this is so confusing. Not Supa, blank, underscore, blank. A very long chapter with over 5,000 words. A lot of events happened in just this one chapter, and in all honesty, it was fun to write. Especially writing moments of the crew bonding. To show me, the author, that you enjoy reading this story as much as I enjoy typing it up, please leave comments along the way. I love reading them. A vote wouldn't hurt as well. It's summertime, so I hope all of you out there is going to be having the most fun before school starts again. I'll see you in the next chapter. Where stories live. Discover now.